Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, gamer boys and girls, welcome back to the pod. Summer just rolled in and that means I'm a year older and wiser. School is over for some of you, and hopefully everyone goes to a nice, well-earned holiday really soon. This month's bundle luckily wasn't revealed before time, and that meant there were some really nice surprises. As usual, we tested these games at least for 3 hours, so if you need some help what to pick in this month's bundle, well, let us reveal what we think. Enjoy!
Yes, you're not wrong. Civilization 6 was indeed a previous Humble title already. However, that was more than 3 years ago, in the February 2018 Humble monthly bundle, which was actually a much better package than the one we are currently reviewing, but that is neither here nor there, back to Civ 6. The Civilization series was originally created by Sid Meier and is widely considered to be the origin of the entire 4X genre of strategy games. Commonality of these turn-based titles is how the player would start out leading just a handful of troops and a starting base or city, and from there aim for world domination through the 4 X's: exploration, expanse, exploitation and extermination. Specifically, in the case of the Civilization titles, once you took your pick of the many available stylized historical figures, you're dropped into a hex-based world, with your aim being to stand the test of time all the way from the ancient days to the future. You can prove yourself via one of the multiple victory conditions. Domination requires defeating your foes. Science victory is achieved through winning the space race. Culture victory is awarded to those whose nation is the most artsy, inviting foreign tourism in, and even impressing locals enough for them not to want to leave. Religious victory can be reached through starting a religion and spreading it to be the dominant religion of the entire planet. Or, if no one reaches any of these, at a certain point the winner will be decided based on scores. I'm not going to go into further gameplay details, otherwise we'd be sitting here until tomorrow morning, but rather, let's take a look at whether there's any point of opting in if you already were a sub back in 2018. Back then, you would get the base game of Civilization 6, and you'd also get the Australia and the Vikings DLC content. Now, you get the same package, plus 4 other DLC packs introducing further civilizations and scenarios, plus 2 expansions, Rise and Fall and Gathering Storm. Rise and Fall delivers including but not limited to Great and Dark Ages, city-based loyalty and governors, tweaks in diplomacy, additional civs, leaders, wonders and a boatload more other things. In comparison, Gathering Storm, as the name suggests, delivers environmental effects and changes to the game, power supply becomes a new resource to manage, World Congress makes its introduction, and a similar wide cast of additional civs, leaders and content also awaits those interested. Civilization is one of the greatest franchises of gaming. If you haven't yet dipped your toes into the experience, you shouldn't hesitate any longer, but even if you're a long-time fan, I believe Civ 6 delivers enough new toys to keep you occupied for your bucks.
Disjunction. Lately we are facing more and more old school style of games. When we tested Loop Hero a while ago, I really liked the way it represented the distant past, where all the games looked like that. If you haven't seen the video we made about it, definitely check it out. The reason I brought up Loop Hero, besides the shameless plug, is that Disjunction and Effie from this bundle also made me feel these vibes. Disjunction is a solid stealth adventure game. The game starts out in Central City, a slum district established in the Central Park area of New York in the late 2040s. We jump in the shoes of Frank, a private investigator, and we are tasked to look into a case involving a prestigious character and a drug bust. Given a lead that he was arrested after visiting a new non-profit health clinic, the game begins with Frank infiltrating said clinic to uncover evidence. During the tutorial mission, the game already pans out what you should expect. It's a retro stealth game. You will be sneaking around with your gadgets, taking down enemies, finding keys, hiding and avoiding traps. When you are sneaking, you will see enemy vision cones and can use this to plan your attack. If you aren't sneaking, you won't be able to see this information and you will be making noise, meaning everybody will notice you and shoot you to pieces. Of course, you can go guns blazing, but I didn't find that as satisfying as taking enemies down from behind without a sound. I have to mention that the stealth aspect of the game is good, but please don't expect Metal Gear or Dishonored level of execution. As the story progresses, you will meet two other characters whose stories are parallel to Frank's, and each character has his or her own gadgets and motivation and background. The story dialogue is well written and you can mouse over key names and topics in the text for more detailed information on certain things. You can also uncover magazines and newspaper clippings during the gameplay, which adds to the lore of the game. For those who doesn't like reading, well, I got bad news for you guys. No voice acting here, just walls of text, just like in the good old times. The game looks like what you would expect 20 years ago, and I love that feel. I'm still a sucker for pixel art and I really like the presentation. The music aims to bring a tense feeling, so that delivers as well. Disjunction should be a pick for those who like stealth games and can enjoy old vibes here and there. It's a great game, despite the fact that it falls short on the stealth aspect.
Create a nice looking outdoors environment. Fill it with your choice of hostile, native wildlife, be it aliens, robots, zombies or infested. Break up the monotony of forests and hills with buildings that your future players can explore and are overflowing with collectible rubbish. Spice things up a little with a basic as balls experience based perk system and similar quality combat, et voila! You've just created your very own first-person survivor horror game. All that's left is to name it Z-Day or Deadlands, maybe try Desolate. Unfortunately, by sharing this recipe with you, I've pretty much exhausted all I had to say with regards to Desolate, but I guess we can try to drill a bit deeper into the hellish snowfest it offers. During the tutorial/prelude, we learned the core gameplay is the stock standard survivor horror experience of getting from point A to point B, occasionally coming across enemies we can either stealth around or engage. Stealth is the more boring option, but probably the one you'll be choosing most of the time, as combat just feels jank. Your means of interaction are swinging your weapon, charging up your swing for a heavier hit, and blocking. Naturally, all of these cost stamina, and your stamina seems to run out super fast, while enemies keep wailing at you and dodging your attack, like they've just popped a carton of Red Bulls. We also get a first glimpse at some sort of vague story about a certain experiment, and later on, some day of ultimate change that apparently resulted in paranormal activities and some kind of zombie mutant whatever creatures appearing. One has to give credit where it's due, however, and there's no arguing, Desolate delivers on the visuals and places you in a world you'd rightfully feel tempted to explore. Unfortunately, the sounds don't play as nice. Attempting to locate enemies based on the sounds I heard often left me staring into the vast nothingness, while the sought enemy would just appear next to me. Let's not forget to mention, to break the monotony of the 15-minute runs from point A to point B over and over again, when you're sent to new locations, you can expect to experience paranormal sightings, or, in other words, completely out of place jump scares that add absolutely jack shit to the story or gameplay, but instead just makes everything feel that much more painful. Oh, and in case you were interested, Desolate is playable with up to 3 other players, so if you enjoy the suffering of others, look no further for a way to share your pain.
Effie. Effie is a 3D platformer adventure game. The odd kind of. Okay then, gather around the fire kiddos, let me tell you about the times when Super Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot were the real deal. Those games were the absolute banger when I was a kid. And now, somewhat 2 decades later, I'm playing Effie, and I'm having the same feelings I had back then. Effie brings me joy, and yes, it isn't the most beautiful game of all time, but this crude, simplistic nature is something I have missed over the years. The story is about a warrior named Gallan, who's been cursed with a premature old age by a witch. Your goal is to break this curse and defeat this malicious sorceress by traversing colorful environments and slaying monsters and demons. It might seem like a shallow premise, but it works because how the story is served. It is served like a fairy tale, with the narrator constantly talking about what you do currently in the game, even suggesting trying out things when you miss them, like jumping down into the abyss just to find there some secrets. The core gameplay involves basic platforming and combat, with a sprinkling of item collecting and simple puzzles. I'm probably not the target age for this game, as the puzzles for me were really easy to solve, but it adds a nice touch to the game. The combat is nice, it isn't too hard and isn't as fleshed out as Dark Souls obviously, but you will get a handful of skills that will aid you in battle. The platforming elements are somewhere in the middle ground in terms of difficulty and depth. I could easily traverse through terrain and only died a handful of times, so I would say it's pretty okay. The scenery is amazing in this game, and since it is semi-open world, you can spend a tremendous amount of time trying to find every secret, relic and collectible. I was drawn in after coming out from the tutorial part of the game. I couldn't shake the feeling that there is an adventure waiting for me. I was utterly amazed and sold by each chapter. The windmill city, the winery where wine flows like river, the creepy castle where everything was built out of stone and is cold as ice. The devs made sure everywhere you go in this game you will feel like you ended up in a fairy tale. The only downside I must mention is that even though I have a master of a computer, sometimes Effie has some frame rate issues. But apart from this tiny issue, I would suggest picking it, as this was the second favorite game of mine from this month's bundle.
Ikenfell was the major league surprise of this month's bundle and refers to itself as a turn-based tactical RPG released in autumn last year. Now, I'm not convinced I'm buying the RPG part. Admittedly, there's an experience system based on which you'd level up and receive prefixed stat boosts and spells. You can also change your equipment and, if I understand correctly, change your party composition later on, but at the same time you're ushered down a straight line story-wise, and I'm not aware of any consequential decision to be made or any way to impact the world around you, so you be the judge. The battles are, however, indeed turn-based and play out on grid zones. In the first close to 4 hours, I haven't noticed placing having a massive impact, but maybe later on, with bigger party size, that'll also come into play. What I did notice, and find super fun however, is how the developers mixed up the usual system of just selecting abilities or actions from a menu with basing the effectiveness of given spell or action on the player's performance, as, upon casting, a reflex-based QTE would take place. If you react on time, you can buff your own damage or reduce incoming, but in exchange, on a miss, you'll lower your damage or take increased damage from foes. If you've seen a few other reviews on this channel, you might have noticed I despise QTE sections in games. But this system caught me completely off guard and actually works great. Also, even if for you it specifically didn't work great, you have the option to make it easier or just flat out turn it off basically. The story starts out intriguing, playing on familiar, Harry Potter-esque vibes, with a school for witches, appearance of the dark arts, goofy groundskeeper and so on, but never actually crossing the rip-off line for the player to get pissed off. Visuals, sounds and music all deliver with style. I just wish the display of information was a bit more well thought out. For example, to get an idea how much HP your opponents are currently sitting on, you first need to confirm movement, go into the menu, select the specific non-action action, and then pick the specific enemy you're interested in from the turn order bar. This is at least 4 more steps you have to take than what would be reasonable, and the fix shouldn't be that hard. Just popping 2 numbers under each portrait on the turn order bar would completely solve all problems. Just like communicating HP stats, the game also struggles communicating how its stat points work. At some point, for example, out of my 2 characters, on one I had 15 speed, compared to the other having 8, and still, every single fight, the one with lower would go first. There's either a not communicated missing component that gets taken account when calculating order, or, even worse, your speed stat would just be a minor adjustment added to a randomly generated number when determining order. Either way, you don't get to know the answer because the communication is lacking. These 2 gripes, however, aren't even remotely enough to tarnish the cheerful mood the story and the characters set, the fresh feeling combat that hopefully won't grow old sooner rather than later, and the charming presentation. I absolutely recommend you give Ikenfell a shot, let it prove itself. Who knows, you might even have as fun of a time as I did.
Going Under. Going Under is a fantastic roguelite by Aggro Crab, and also a terrific satire about the economic system we live in. The game establishes a humorous, not-so-fictional world in which an intern Jackie Fiasco is forced clearing out startups, these will be the dungeons in the game, for a beverage company that has just been acquired by a huge tech corpo. We the player step into the shoes of Fiasco to swap a promised marketing internship for a procedurally generated dungeon action adventure. There are several dungeons, each one of them is a parody of a real company or application. Joblin is a food delivery company run by goblins who are heavily addicted to caffeine. Winkydink is a flirting app whose employees are really hot demons. And there's Styxcoin. Yes, you've guessed it, it's a cryptocurrency company where skeletons are literally mining the coins from caverns. The combat in the dungeons is one of the selling points of the game. I mean, you can use office equipment to pummel down your enemies, that's a secret wish of mine. The variety of weaponry is wide, practically everything we find in the rooms works to face enemies, from keyboards to dynamites or even electric guitars. Each object has a limited number of hits, and when we hit it, the weapon breaks, providing a more powerful last attack. With this method, Going Under forces us to do 2 things. Not to get too attached to any weapon, and not to get stuck in one kind of playstyle. Of course, there will be also skills and upgrades to pick, shops to visit during our runs, and also our colleagues from the office will function as mentors, giving us special passive skills. The other selling point of the game is the characters, and the narrative, and the humor, the satire it gives. I was laughing my ass off and I caught myself with a permanent half smile while I was playing this game. I can wholeheartedly suggest this one to you guys, it is a blast to play, and this game was my favorite from the ones I've tested. 10 out of 10 people will use office equipment to pummel down his colleagues.
Secret Neighbor is the follow-up release to similarly named Hello Neighbor, in which the developers branch away from previous single-player stealth horror experience and take the base concept of rascal kids nosing around a suspicious neighbor's house into an online PvP environment. The chosen genre of execution is asymmetrical horror, think the likes of Dead by Daylight or Evolve. 6 players gather in a lobby, then once the game starts, one of them is randomized to be the bad guy, while others play as the kids. If you're on the kids team, your goal is to turn the house upside down, searching for colored keys that open locks on the basement, and once you've opened all, you're ready to escape. To assist with reaching this goal, each kid brings a different asset to the table, for example getting clues about the key's whereabouts, being slightly better at fighting, or being able to assemble gadgets. On the other hand, if you were chosen to be the neighbor, you start off disguised as one of the kids yourself, and, while attempting to keep your identity hidden from the others, you'll occasionally pop into your original form to get rid of the kids one by grabbing them and turning them into dolls over a few seconds. It's important to do this away from the others, however, as if any of the other kids are present, they can stop the transformation by throwing shit at you and briefly stunning you. As for the gameplay experience, while nothing outstanding, it's not bad either. Your first few runs you'll find partially interesting, as the house layout seems to be well thought out and it's fun to discover, but on the same note, you'll get more and more frustrated as you won't have the slightest idea where you are, where to go, and you'll just keep opening useless drawers and cabinets if they haven't already been opened by your buddies. This is mostly on the back of the game not having any proper tutorial. It instead pops a YouTube playlist of tutorial videos for you to watch. Also, there's no offline with AI mode where you could get a hand of things. At least though, it seems there's an actual player base, and not only now due to Humble, but looking at recent statistics, there appears to be a constant ebb and flow similar to that of currently, so good news is, you'll be getting into lobbies and games fast. Speaking of fast, each round is limited to 15-minute stops, and actually rarely even goes that long, so if you're one for short but multiple bursts of gameplay, you'll find what you're looking for here. What you won't find, however, is matchmaking. Lobbies will be filled on first come first served basis, which, without exception, resulted in all my games played being about a single, long-time player literally stomping everyone else in the lobby. Actually, let me correct myself, all but 3 of my games, as during my 3 hours with Secret Neighbor, I've experienced 3 crashes. At the end of the day, I for one, while didn't hate my time with this title, neither did I really enjoy it. Aiming feels clunky, core gameplay feels shallow, and it became repetitive really quick. Who did however enjoy their time were all the little kids I played with and heard through the baseline turned on proximity voice chat. Not only was this an interesting twist on my final thoughts and my verdict, but it was also a probably unintended boost to the immersion levels. Seeing all the kid characters running around and actually hearing kid players chatting, screaming and laughing around is really fun. On this note, while I wouldn't recommend Secret Neighbor to an adult audience, I would recommend it to a younger one, your kids maybe. Just make sure you either turn off the bass setting for the microphones, or make sure they understand it is turned on and are able to handle a situation like this.
Milky Way Prince: The Vampire Star. This game is a visual novel. So, as usual for the genre, you will be reading and clicking a lot. The characters are heavily influenced by the Japanese manga style. The scenery is minimalistic, with usually each scene consisting of a maximum 4 to 5 colors. The story is about a guy named Milky, who is a young man that loves stars and starfishes, furthermore cherishes the story of the picture book Milky Way Prince, which is about a star that fell down on Earth and transformed into a prince. One day, a meteorite crashes down. At the point of impact, he meets a man called Sun, and the two fall in love immediately. As the game goes on, we get to witness this love story slowly falling apart on the back of pain and mental illness, such as depression or borderline disorder. These are very heavy topics and issues that the game somewhat manages to make you feel. My main problem with this game is the writing, which is just not good enough. Somehow everything felt cringy. When the game describes a feeling, it just doesn't work. The protagonist is dropping F-bombs everywhere, and he seems shallow, not a kind of person who is capable of understanding and processing deep emotional trauma. Same goes for the presentation and the graphics. I don't have any problems with flashing lights usually, but this game made my eyes hurt, with its constant pulsating effects and the prolonged use of sharp, in-your-face contrasts using black and white. The controls aren't well designed, and ended up feeling very unfriendly. I sometimes misclicked because the controls went elsewhere where I originally expected them to go. The translation has some issues as well, and you can spot these tiny mistakes when reading the subtitles, and sometimes the English is just kinda broken. There are some nice unique elements to the game, for example, when the characters are having a sexy time. The player has to choose the senses to know what is happening, like hearing, vision, tasting, touching, or when the symbolism kicks in as a second language for the game. But these minor unique elements fail to outweigh all the issues this game has. I appreciate that this is the first game from the developer, but looking at the end result, I can't help but feel this story should have been told through a different medium. For example, a book or a manga instead of a game. Only pick this one if you are interested in the story or if you like the style of the game. But there are much better choices out there.
Panzer Paladin is a 2D action platformer that seems to be heavily inspired by the Mega Man franchise, but certainly adds its own flair to the mix. Launching the game, the very first thing to greet you is one of the best, retro-vibe pixel intro animations I've ever seen. Whoever is responsible for delivering it deserves some damn serious props. A tutorial level will then introduce you to the core gameplay loop of navigating your protagonist, either in their mech suit or without it, through the 2D levels until you reach and beat up a boss monster. On your way there, you'll come across a regularly repeated variety of trash mobs that you can often decide whether or not to beat up, which is an important decision in relation to Panzer Paladin's identifying twist, its weapon system. Starting out, your mech doesn't have any weapons, only a shield, as per plot it's actually a rescue mech, and you'll have to fist your first weapon out of your enemies. After receiving it as a random drop, you can actually use that weapon in one of 4 ways. First and most obvious, stick the pointy end in the soft parts of enemies. 2. All weapons have a spell associated to them, and you can expand given weapon to cast its spell. These can be anything from healing, buffing to direct damage and so on. The third use would be at one of the 2 checkpoints in each level. There, you can stick one of your weapons into the stone a la Excalibur, thus activating the respawn point on death. And last but not least, the more weapons you collect, and the least used up they are, the more you'll have to change in between missions, basically as currency for upgrading your mech. To be perfectly honest, this sounds way more interesting than it actually is in practice, and the gameplay experience isn't really helped too much by the controls that feel way heavier than I'd prefer. On the other hand, it's hard not to notice what a great work the graphical designers have done, not only with the previously mentioned intro animation, but as well with regards to the in-game sprites and levels. Same could also be said about the game's soundtrack, delivering some satisfying retro-sounding chiptune melodies, but not about the sound design, which often felt over the top and annoying, rather than a good support to the vibes. My main issue, however, is neither the occasionally annoying sound, nor the sluggish feeling controls, but rather how the gameplay just doesn't captivate. The generic story of having to fly to locations and beat up unknown baddies is as captivating as running around in circles, and due to both your own and the enemy's limited moveset, fights don't feel like anything special either. At first, I thought that's maybe because I'm playing on normal difficulty, but allow me to show you my first attempt of the first boss fight I came across after pumping up the difficulty to hard mode. There are a few additional modes to explore instead. Already without beating the game, Challenge Mode and Speedrun mode is available after you clear levels, and there's also a creative corner where you can design your own weapons to be wielded by the mech, which could then potentially show up in other players' runs as well. As much as it saddens me, because I really like the visuals and the music, the lack of an engaging core gameplay loop just keeps me from being able to recommend Panzer Paladin to anyone.
Paw 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 is a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up game where you play as a part of a resistance in their effort to bring down the king. The story is about a kingdom where every animal lived in peace until the Fire Nation until a meteor crashed into the king's castle, changing him completely. His first edict was that everyone has to wear pants from now on, and the kingdom tore into two factions, one with the king and with the pants, and the rebellion called the anti-pants. As you can see, the story doesn't take itself very seriously, and the game will neither. The game actually is about you picking a character and start traversing through the beautifully painted 2D map, beating up everyone with your weapons and skills, gathering resources and XP, beating the mini bosses, and finishing the stage. Since it is a game from the 2020s, there are RPG elements of course. All your skills and abilities can be leveled up, you can buy new better weapons, you can unlock new moves and combos, etc. The fighting is fun in this game, the enemy types have a big variety, and I have never had a dull moment while playing. After finishing the stage or after you've died, you can go back to camp, buy your upgrades, hone your skills, or buy a companion that will aid you in battle. So all in all, these are the parts I really liked about this game, but here's the part I didn't like. It is okay that when I die I still get the XP, and it is a very welcomed part. But after you reach level 5 or 4 with a character, getting leveled up becomes a very slow and tedious process. During my time with this game I clocked 5 hours in it, and I've used 2 characters. And these 2 characters are at level 4 and 5. And with them I didn't unlock 1/6 of the skill tree, despite having 2.5 hours on each character. Apart from this tiny issue though, this game is a perfect example of a good craftsmanship. It is wacky, it is fun to play for short bursts, and it is very funny. It is a refreshing take on the genre, but falls a bit short on the leveling aspect. So grab this if you like the genre, it's a solid game.
Let me get this out of my system straight away. There's absolutely not a single thing I like about Worms Rumble. I went into this test expecting an experience similar to the great times I used to have playing Worms Armageddon, just maybe brought up to date presentation wise. What I got instead is a painful mixture of poor gameplay experience and the rotten stench of a dead game. Back to square one though, core concept of the game is to throw up to 32 players into a lobby, each controlling a single worm. They would then be spawned into a map containing multiple loot boxes scattered all over the place, each dropping a random weapon, grenade or power-up, and once they've managed to kit themselves out, players are free to go ham on whomever they would come across. Controlling a single worm compared to a squad is, however, not the only and neither the most noticeable difference compared to Worms titles of old. The biggest, and in my opinion worst change is throwing the turn-based tactical gameplay away in exchange for the real-time mess Rumble delivers. Instead of each player starting on equal ground, some will instantly open a bazooka, a shield and a jetpack, while others will run around finding nothing else but shotguns and medkits. Instead of tactically placing your squad, then picking the opponents off via careful aiming, Rumble is all about frantically rolling and jumping around, lightning fast movement and spamming whatever possible. At some point, you'd likely get better at controlling your weapons, and it would become less of a case of spamming. Good luck, however, with getting there, as there's no matchmaking in this title. 8 out of 10 times, you'll be stomped by guys with hundreds and hundreds of hours in the game. The other 2 times, maybe you'll have a chance to improve a tad. In case PvP isn't your preference anyway, well, unlucky you, matchmaking isn't the only feature Rumble is missing. Single player content, other than the tutorial, is also completely absent. And let us not even stop here. While listing absentees, we might as well pause to mention a third missing component, the player base. There's usually not enough people online to fill a single lobby of 32 players. Let's not even think about multiple matches or game modes, of which Rumble would present Deathmatch, Team Deathmatch, King of the Hill and Team King of the Hill, but you might as well ignore the existence of the latter two, as it seems there's practically never a lobby for them. The last 20 or so try-hard Timmies of this game all gather in Deathmatch. Beyond having difficulties finding games, an additional awkward result of the lack of players is games starting with less than the expected 32 players, which doesn't really play well with the huge arenas designed. If you spawn or respawn on the other end than where everyone else is being busy, you can look forward to a boring long walk in hopes of getting in on the action. As I stated at the beginning, there's sadly not a single aspect of Worms Rumble that I'm fond of. I don't appreciate the changes in gameplay, there's no player base or single player mode, but in their stead, there's at least a bunch of cash shop cosmetics in case you want it to drop more than just the box price on the game. If I were you, I definitely wouldn't waste my precious disk space on this title.
Stubbs the zombie in Rebel without a pulse. In 2005, Stubbs the zombie was created by Wideload Games and introduced us to a new part of the zombie world. This time we were in the role of a zombie and we had to eat a nation and enjoy the blood of their existence. Now after more than a decade it is back on Steam, so let's see the remastered version. Stubbs is a third-person shooter in the action-adventure genre that follows the story of a man in love named Stubbs who turns into a zombie at the end of his failed love affair. The story is that Stubbs is in love with a girl, but the girl's father is dissatisfied with the relationship, and in the end this opposition causes Stubbs to be killed by his girlfriend's father. Years later, Stubbs' girls get married and has a son who later builds a modern city on Stubbs' tomb. Stubbs gets angry at these issues and rises. Well, the plot isn't very interesting, that is for sure. Let's see how the gameplay holds itself after 16 years. Sadly, the gameplay isn't very diverse, but the devs have tried to provide various features and powers to the zombies in our story. In some stages we can control vehicles, including tanks, and we will have various powers, including throwing our guts to cause an explosion or rip a huge fart to stun the enemies. Catching a human and tearing open his skull just to eat his brains is fun for the first 20 minutes of the game, and it gets boring pretty damn quick. The music is okay, but the AI is terrible, but I wouldn't hold against Stubbs as it was developed back in 2005. I won't recommend this game, and let me tell you why. During these recent years, a lot of classics got remade. The most recent example of this is Mass Effect. And don't get me wrong, some of them have a purpose and it is okay, but when we are talking about a game like Stubbs, well, I do have a problem. See, the graphics are, well, mediocre by 2021 standards, and it is the gameplay that's ultimately the problem. It's just old, it's not fun. It was, I guess, in 2005 when I was in my teens, but it just isn't anymore. It is sadly a shallow experience. Almost every mechanic is outdated due to time, and therefore it falls short, in my opinion. Only pick this game if you are a fan of the original title. If not, well, there are much better games in this bundle.
Let's not beat around the bush, the 2020 June bundle was the worst in a very long time. Despite the pull of the lead title and the variety of having a 4x strategy, a dungeon crawler, an asymmetrical and a survival horror game, a 2D and a 3D action platformer, a pair of RPGs, a beat-em-up, a zombie-themed FPS adventure, a visual novel, and a 2D battle arena. If almost half of these titles are low quality, it's as if there was only half of this variety. Based on our experience, top entries of the June package are Civilization 6, Effie, Ikenfell, and Going Under. Due to the non-existent player base, Worms lands in the disaster section, and I'm not gonna lie, Humble is starting to piss me off with these regular dead game inclusions. We also found Stubbs and Panzer Paladin become boring quick, Milky Way Prince's presentation is poor, and Desolate is void of any interest, but the remainder titles form a solid midfield group. This sums up to a total 22 points out of the maximum 36, thanks to the few titles on top putting in a lot of work to compensate. As always, we'd be very grateful if you pleased the machine gods by liking our video. If you'd like to come along for next month's ride, don't hesitate to subscribe. Any and all recommendations are welcome in the comment section. Don't forget to wish the birthday boy happy birthday, and we hope to see you again in July.